My parents stole my savings for a Caribbean cruise while I fought to survive a crash. What I did next shattered their lies. I'm Claire Donovan, and at 34, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like, until the world turned upside down in a screech of metal and a blur of pain. I was a senior compliance consultant at Nexapharm, a Chicago pharmaceutical giant, where I'd blown the whistle on illegal drug trials that endangered thousands. That choice made me enemies, but I never imagined they'd come for me, or that my own family would stab me in the back when I needed them most. This is the story of how a catastrophic car crash, orchestrated by corporate hitmen, left me fighting for my life, and how my parents, Richard and Ellen, turned my vulnerability into their personal jackpot. It's a story of survival, deception, and the kind of trust that shatters like glass under a hammer. If you've ever wondered how far someone can fall, or how they claw their way back, stick with me. This is going to be a hell of a ride. It started on a biting February evening in Chicago, the kind where the wind off Lake Michigan cuts through your coat like a blade. I was driving home from a late-night meeting with my lawyer, Sarah Bennett, who'd been helping me navigate the fallout of my whistleblower case. The $500,000 0-cent settlement I'd secured was a lifeline, tucked away in a secure account, but it came with a target on my back. Nexapharm's executives didn't take kindly to my exposing their off-label drug trials, which had pushed untested antidepressants on vulnerable patients, leading to suicides they'd buried in redacted reports. My testimony had cost them millions and sparked federal investigations. Sarah warned me to watch my back, but I thought I was safe in my locked-down Audi, its dashboard glowing softly as I navigated the icy streets of River North. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble was a faint shudder in the steering wheel, a vibration I couldn't place. I'd had the car serviced a week ago, so I chalked it up to the cold. Then, as I merged onto Lakeshore Drive, the brakes didn't respond. My foot slammed the pedal, but the car didn't slow. My heart lurched into my throat as the Chicago skyline ticked upward, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. Headlights blurred into streaks, and the Chicago skyline spun past like a kaleidoscope. I yanked the wheel, trying to swerve into the next lane, but the car fishtailed, tires screaming against the asphalt. A horn blared, and I caught a glimpse of a semi-truck's grill in my rearview mirror, its lights blinding. I screamed, my voice swallowed by the roar of the engine, and then, impact. The world exploded. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and my body slammed against the seatbelt as the car spun out. Pain seared through my spine, a white-hot lightning bolt that stole my breath. The airbag deployed, smothering me in a cloud of talc and fabric, and for a moment everything went black. When I came to, the car was a twisted wreck, steam hissing from the hood. My blood trickled down my forehead, warm and sticky, and my legs felt like they were pinned under 1,000 pounds of concrete. I tried to move, but agony ripped through my lower back, pinning me to the seat. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, but all I could think was, this wasn't an accident. The paramedics arrived, their voices sharp and urgent as they cut me out of the wreckage. "Stay with us, Claire," one of them said, his face a blur through my pain-fogged vision. They strapped me to a board, the movement sending fresh waves of torment through my spine. At the hospital, the ER was a whirlwind of beeping monitors, sterile smells, and doctors barking orders. An MRI revealed the damage: 3 spinal fractures, 2 herniated discs, and severe cord compression. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neurosurgeon with steady hands and a no-nonsense demeanor, laid it out plain. "You need emergency spinal fusion surgery, Claire. Without it, you're looking at permanent nerve damage, maybe paralysis." I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to process the words, paralysis at 34. My life, my career, my independence, the downtown loft I'd scraped and saved for, was crumbling. I'd built everything from nothing, clawing my way out of a childhood of financial chaos in Seattle, where my parents' lies and schemes had taught me to trust no one but myself. And now I'd be dependent again, not just on doctors, but on whoever could help me through recovery. The thought made my stomach churn. I called my parents, Richard and Ellen, from the hospital, my voice shaking as I explained the surgery. They'd retired to Phoenix a year ago, claiming a fresh start after decades of financial messes. I hadn't seen them in months, our relationship strained by years of their borrowing and my hard-won boundaries. But when I told them about the crash, they sounded genuinely shaken. "We're coming to Chicago," my mom said, her voice thick with tears. "We'll stay in your loft, help you through this." "You shouldn't be alone, sweetheart," my dad, usually gruff, added. "We've got you, Claire. We're not letting you down this time." I wanted to believe them. God, I wanted to. But a lifetime of their broken promises, stolen college funds, fake emergencies, lies about investments made me hesitate. Still, I had no choice. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning, and Dr. Vasquez was clear. I'd need round-the-clock care for at least 6 weeks, maybe more. I couldn't afford a full-time nurse, not with my settlement tied up in investments and my disability insurance still processing. My best friend, Mia, a journalist who'd been covering my whistleblower case, was on assignment in D.C. My sister, Lauren, lived in Seattle and couldn't take time off from her nursing job. My parents were my only option, so I gave them the keys to my loft, the PIN to my recovery fund, a $50,000 0-cents account I'd set up for medical expenses, and a warning. This is for my care, nothing else. The surgery was a nightmare. I woke up to a world of pain, my spine now a lattice of titanium screws and rods, my body a prisoner to a hospital bed. Dr. Vasquez visited the next day, her face grim. The damage was worse than we thought. We had to fuse an extra vertebra, and there's some nerve damage. You're looking at 12 weeks minimum before you can return to work, with the first month in near total bed rest. I swallowed hard, the reality sinking in. I couldn't shower alone, couldn't cook, couldn't even get to the bathroom without help. The independence I'd fought for my whole life was gone, replaced by a helplessness that felt like drowning. My parents arrived the day I was discharged, and at first they were a lifeline. My dad, with his broad shoulders and salesman's charm, carried my bags and rearranged my loft to fit a hospital bed in the living room. My mom, with her quick hands and event planner efficiency, organized my medications into a color-coded chart. They sat with me during those first brutal days, when the pain was so intense I could barely speak. "We are here, Claire," my dad said, squeezing my hand. "We know we've messed up before, but we're going to make this right." I clung to those words, desperate to believe they'd changed. But cracks appeared fast. By the second day, they were gone for hours on errands, leaving me alone with an empty water glass and a medication schedule I couldn't reach. When I asked where they'd been, their answers were vague. Traffic, long lines at the pharmacy, a mix-up at the grocery store. Once, I caught my mom scrolling through my phone while I dozed, her fingers moving too fast for it to be innocent. Another time, I wheeled myself into the kitchen, every movement a stab of pain, and overheard them whispering in the guest room. "She won't notice," my dad said, his voice low. "Not with the meds she's on." My mom hesitated. "What if she checks her accounts?" My dad laughed, a sound that chilled me. "When has Claire ever had time to check her investments?" My heart pounded, but I was trapped. The painkillers dulled my mind, and my body was a traitor, refusing to move without screaming. I started keeping my phone under my pillow, but the seed of doubt had taken root. Then came the first real blow. My dad approached me one morning, his face a mask of concern. "Claire, some of your medical bills aren't covered by insurance. We need access to your recovery fund to pay them directly. I frowned, my mind foggy but alert enough to sense something off. The insurance should cover most of it, I said. What bills? He waved a hand. Co-pays, specialists, equipment. It's complicated. Let us handle it. You're in no shape to deal with this. Against every instinct, I gave them the login for my recovery fund, emphasizing it was only for medical expenses. Nothing else, I said, my voice sharp despite the pain. Of course, sweetheart, my mom said, her smile too smooth. We just want to take care of you. But their behavior shifted. They spent less time with me, leaving for hours at a time. My meals became sporadic, often just a granola bar left on the table. My medications were late, leaving me in agony as the pain clawed through my spine. When I asked for help to the bathroom, my dad sighed, as if I were an inconvenience. One night, I woke to the sound of my front door creaking open. My heart raced, thinking it was my parents returning from another mysterious errand. But the footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, and activated the security camera I'd installed before the crash. The grainy feed showed a masked figure in my living room, rifling through my desk. My whistleblower documents, hard copies I'd kept as insurance, were gone by the time the police arrived, alerted by my silent alarm. The intruder escaped, but the message was clear. Nexa Farm's reach was long, and they weren't done with me. I didn't tell my parents about the break-in. I couldn't shake the feeling they might be involved, or at least complicit. Their errands had started aligning suspiciously with strange calls to my phone, blocked numbers, heavy breathing, or curt warnings to drop the case. One afternoon, while my mom helped me into bed after a grueling physical therapy session, my dad brought up the recovery fund again. We need $20,000, 0 cents for a specialized recovery bed, he said, his tone too casual. It'll help with circulation, prevent complications. Insurance won't cover it. I demanded details, my suspicion growing. Show me the order form, I said. He promised to bring it later, but his eyes didn't meet mine. The next day, I smelled something acrid in the loft. A faint hiss of gas. Panic surged as I realized it wasn't normal. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Firefighters confirmed a tampered gas line, a deliberate act of sabotage. I was evacuated to a hotel for 2 days, my recovery disrupted, my pains spiking from the stress. My parents were conveniently out during the incident, and when they returned, their concern felt rehearsed. Thank God you're okay, my mom said, but her eyes darted to my dad, a silent conversation I couldn't decode. By the second week, I was a prisoner in my own home, dependent on 2 people whose care was dwindling. Mia texted, offering to visit, but my parents shut it down. You're not strong enough for guests, my mom said, her voice firm. The doctor said rest is critical. But Dr. Vasquez had encouraged visitors to lift my spirits. When I pushed back, my dad snapped, We're doing our best, Claire. You're not exactly easy to care for. The words stung, but they also clarified something I'd been avoiding. My parents weren't here for me. They were here for my money. The final straw came when they announced they had to leave for a family emergency in Seattle. Your cousin Mark is sick, my dad said, avoiding my eyes. We'll be back in 5 days. We've hired a nurse to check on you. I barely knew Mark, and their urgency felt staged. They left that afternoon, promising to call, but their phones went straight to voicemail. The nurse showed up for 3 hours a day, barely enough to help me to the bathroom and change my bandages. I was alone for hours, my painkillers just out of reach, my water glass empty. The isolation was suffocating, and the fear of another corporate attack, another break-in, another sabotage kept me awake at night. On the 3rd day of their absence, Mia arrived unannounced, her arms full of groceries and her face pale with shock. "Claire, what the hell?" she said, dropping the bags when she saw me, unwashed, dehydrated, surrounded by empty pill bottles. I broke down, telling her about my parents' disappearance and the inadequate nurse. Mia's eyes darkened as she pulled out her phone. "You need to see this." She showed me an Instagram post from my parents, time-stamped that morning. They were on a Caribbean beach, toasting with pina coladas, their caption a gut punch, celebrating 30 years of love thanks to our daughter's generosity. Paradise found. I logged into my bank account, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. The recovery fund, $50,000, 0 cents I'd set aside for my survival, was down to $10,000, 0 cents. Withdrawals over 3 days totaled $40,000, 0 cents, funneled into bookings for a Grand Cayman resort, first-class flights, and a private yacht tour. Email confirmations in their names showed they'd planned this months ago, before my crash, waiting for the moment I'd be too weak to stop them. The betrayal was a physical blow, my chest tightening as if the screws in my spine were twisting deeper. Mia held me as I sobbed, my body screaming with pain, my heart breaking under the weight of their greed. But the story doesn't end there. That moment, as I stared at the wreckage of my trust, was when I decided to fight back, not just against my parents, but against the corporate machine that had tried to silence me. I froze my accounts, changed my locks, and called Sarah, my lawyer, to start building a case. Nexafarm's threats were escalating. A threatening email arrived that night, warning me to back off or lose more than money. My parents' betrayal was only part of the puzzle. Who was pulling the strings? Were they working with my enemies, or were they just opportunistic vultures? And how much deeper did this conspiracy go? As I lay in that hotel bed, Mia by my side, I realized something. Survival wasn't just about healing my spine. It was about rebuilding my life from the ashes of betrayal, about finding a family that didn't bleed me dry, about facing down the forces that wanted me broken. This is my story, and I'm not done fighting. Want to know what happened when my parents returned, expecting me to forgive them? Or how I uncovered the truth behind the crash that nearly killed me? Stick around. The truth is darker and more dangerous than you think. The Caribbean sun glinted off my parents' pina coladas in that damning Instagram post, a digital dagger that carved through the last threads of trust I'd clung to. I'm Claire Donovan, and if you thought my story began with a car crash orchestrated by corporate hitmen, brace yourself. This chapter is where the real storm hits. Lying in that Chicago hotel bed, my spine a lattice of titanium and pain, I faced a truth uglier than the wreckage of my Audi. My parents, Richard and Ellen, had drained $40,000, 0 cents from my recovery fund to fund their tropical escape while I fought for my life. But this wasn't just about money. It was about a lifetime of lies, a corporate conspiracy tightening its grip, and a fight to reclaim my power from those who'd exploited my weakest moment. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who should have had your back, you'll understand why I couldn't let this go. Stick with me. This gets darker, wilder, and ultimately more triumphant than you can imagine. The hotel room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a temporary refuge after the gas leak that forced me out of my loft. My friend Mia, a journalist with a nose for trouble, sat beside me, her laptop open to my bank account's grim reality. The $50,000, 0 cents I'd set aside for my recovery, medical bills, supplies, a lifeline to survive 12 weeks of immobility, was nearly gone. Withdrawals of $10,000, 0 cents, $15,000, 0 cents, and $15,000, 0 cents, had been siphoned off over 3 days, each transaction time-stamped while I lay helpless, my parents' care a thinly veiled heist. Mia's face was pale, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through their social media. "They booked this trip before your surgery, Claire," she said, pointing to an email confirmation dated 2 months prior. "First-class flights, a private yacht, spa packages, the works. They planned this while you were still walking." The words hit like a punch. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. They'd orchestrated it, waiting for the moment I'd be too weak to fight back. My spine throbbed, the pain a constant reminder of the crash that had brought me here. A crash I now knew was no accident. Nexa Pharm, the pharmaceutical giant I'd exposed for illegal drug trials, had enemies who wanted me silenced. The tampered brakes, the masked intruder who stole my whistleblower documents, the gas leak, all pointed to a corporate machine that didn't forgive. But my parents? They were supposed to be my safe haven, not vultures circling my vulnerability. I called my lawyer, Sarah Bennett, from the hotel, my voice shaking with rage and pain. "They stole $40,000, 0 cents, I told her, clutching the phone. "And I think Nexa Pharm is behind more than just the crash." Sarah's tone was calm but urgent. "We need to lock everything down, accounts, credit, everything. And we need to talk to the police. This is financial exploitation, Claire, and it's not just your parents. If Nexa Pharm is involved, we're dealing with a bigger beast." She promised to send a private investigator to dig into the crash and the recent threats, including the anonymous email that had arrived last night. "Drop the case, or you'll lose more than money." Mia stayed with me, coordinating with her boyfriend Alex to secure my loft. They changed the locks, installed new security cameras, and arranged for a full-time nurse to replace the part-time one my parents had hired, a nurse who'd left me dehydrated and in agony for hours at a time. But even with Mia's support, I felt like I was drowning. The painkillers dulled my mind, but not enough to silence the questions screaming inside me. Were my parents working with Nexa Pharm? Had they been bought off? Or were they just opportunistic leeches? And how much deeper did this conspiracy go? The next morning, I woke to a new threat. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You can't hide, Claire. We know where you are." Attached was a photo of me in the hotel window, taken from the street below. My heart raced, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone. Mia grabbed it, her eyes narrowing. "This is Nexa Pharm," she said, her journalist instincts kicking in. "They're trying to scare you into silence." She called the police, who arrived within the hour, but the photo's timestamp was fresh, taken just after midnight. Whoever was watching me was close, and they weren't stopping. The police suggested I move to a safe house, but I refused. I'd already been driven from my loft once. I wasn't running again. Instead, I asked Sarah to expedite the investigation into the crash. "Find out who tampered with my brakes," I said, "and check if my parents had any contact with Nexa Pharm." The idea that my own family might be colluding with my enemies was a knife in my gut, but I couldn't ignore the possibility. Their betrayal was too calculated, too brazen to be just greed. By the time I returned to my loft, the new locks and cameras gave me a fragile sense of security. Mia stayed over, sleeping on the couch beside my hospital bed, her presence a lifeline in the chaos. But the threats didn't stop. The next night, my laptop, secured with military-grade encryption, froze, a red warning flashing across the screen. "Back off or we release everything." Someone had tried to hack my files, including backups of the whistleblower documents I'd hidden in a cloud vault. I called my old colleague, Jake, a cybersecurity expert who'd helped me expose Nexa Pharm. "They're using brute force attacks," he said after analyzing the breach attempt. "This isn't amateur stuff, Claire. It's corporate-level hacking, probably with insider access." The word insider sent a chill down my spine. My parents had been in my loft for days, with access to my phone, my laptop, my life. Had they handed over passwords, or worse, planted something for Nexa Pharm? I checked my security logs and found unauthorized login attempts from my own Wi-Fi network, time-stamped during one of their errands. The betrayal deepened, a black hole swallowing the last of my hope that they'd changed. Then came the physical therapist's warning, a gut punch that made my recovery feel like a race against time. "You've missed 3 sessions," Dr. Patel said, his voice stern. "Your parents canceled them, saying you were too tired. If you don't stay consistent, you risk permanent mobility issues." I stared at him, my mind reeling. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd sabotaged my healing, leaving me vulnerable to a lifetime in a wheelchair. The rage was a fire in my chest, but it was laced with fear. What else had they done while I was too drugged to notice? I started digging, using what little strength I had to piece together their actions. Mia helped me access my mail, which my parents had redirected to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. Inside were bank statements they'd hidden, showing transfers to offshore accounts I'd never authorized. But the real shock came when I checked my investment portfolio. They'd tried to access my $500,000 0-cents whistleblower settlement, blocked only by 2-factor authentication I'd set up years ago. The attempts were relentless, dozens of login failures over 2 weeks, each one a reminder of how far they'd go. The pressure was crushing. My employer, Nexafarm, sent a legal notice accusing me of leaking confidential documents, a blatant lie to discredit my whistleblower case. The threat of a lawsuit loomed, a tactic to drain my resources and silence me. Meanwhile, my parents' smear campaign escalated. They posted on Facebook, claiming I was unstable from painkillers, tagging family and friends who believed their sob story. My Aunt Linda called, her voice dripping with pity. "Claire, your parents say you're not yourself. Let them help you." I hung up, tears burning my eyes. They were rewriting my reality, painting me as the villain to cover their theft. But the worst was yet to come. On the 5th day of their emergency trip to Seattle, I heard a noise outside my loft at 2 a.m., a faint scratching at the door. My security camera showed a figure in a hoodie, tampering with the lock. I hit the alarm, my heart pounding so hard it felt like my chest. 9 days ago, I'd have called my parents saints, people who'd never let me down. But here I was, 34 years old, flat on my back, spine stitched together with titanium, and they'd chosen a Caribbean cruise over their own daughter. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the kind that sears your soul, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about family. If you've ever had to rebuild trust after it's been shattered, you know how it feels. Like walking on broken glass, every step a reminder of what's been lost. Stick with me, because this story's about to get wilder. It's not just about betrayal. It's about survival, about fighting back when the world's trying to bury you, and about finding strength in the wreckage. Here's what happened when the truth came crashing down. The air in my Chicago loft felt thick with betrayal, the kind that lingers like smoke you can't wave away. I'm Claire Donovan, 34, and I thought I'd seen the worst of human greed when I blew the whistle on Nexafarm's illegal drug trials, exposing their deadly antidepressant cover-up to the tune of a $500,000 0-cent settlement. That was before a corporate orchestrated car crash left me with a shattered spine, before my parents, Richard and Ellen, turned my recovery into their personal ATM, siphoning $40,000 0 cents from my emergency fund for a Caribbean getaway. I was bedridden, stitched together with metal rods, and they left me with a part-time nurse and lies about a sick cousin. But this isn't just a story of being stabbed in the Equalized, the break-in attempt. The police arrived, but the figure vanished into the Chicago night, leaving only a scrawled note slipped under the door. "You were warned." My hands shook as I handed it to the officer, who added it to the growing file on my case. Nexafarm's shadow was everywhere, and now my parents' betrayal felt like part of a larger, more sinister puzzle. I called my sister Lauren in Seattle, hoping for an ally. We'd never been close. She was 5 years younger, the golden child who'd stayed in our parents' orbit while I broke free. "Claire, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Mom and Dad say you're having a breakdown, that the pain meds are making you paranoid." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the sterile hotel room. "Paranoid? They stole $40,000 0 cents while I was too weak to move. Check their Instagram, Lauren. They're not at Cousin Mark's. They're sippin' cocktails in Grand Cayman." I sent her the screenshots, the booking confirmations, the bank records. Her silence was deafening, followed by a quiet, "Oh my God." She confessed they'd hit her up for $2,000 0 cents last month, claiming it was for my medical bills. "I thought I was helping you," she said, her voice breaking. "I had no idea." Lauren's shock was a small comfort, but it didn't erase the isolation. My parents had turned half our family against me, their social media posts painting me as unhinged, a drug-addled whistleblower who'd lost her grip. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins, uncles, even my old high school coach, all urging me to reconsider cutting off my parents. "Family's family," my Aunt Linda texted, oblivious to the $40,000 0 cents hole in my account. I wanted to scream, to show them the receipts, but I was too weak, too raw. The physical therapy sessions my parents canceled had set me back weeks. Dr. Patel's warning about permanent mobility loss haunted me every time I tried to stand. Then came the next blow, a second email from Nextfarm's legal team, this time threatening to seize my settlement funds for breach of confidentiality. They claimed I'd leaked proprietary data, a lie so blatant it could only be a scare tactic. Sarah, my lawyer, was livid. "They're trying to bankrupt you before the federal case escalates," she said over an official source, warning me to drop the whistleblower case or face worse consequences. I wasn't backing down, but the stakes were climbing. My parents' betrayal was personal. Nexa Farms was professional, a two-front war I hadn't signed up for. The gas leak in my loft, confirmed as sabotage by the fire department, had left me jumpy, my nights filled with nightmares of masked intruders and screeching tires. I installed a new security system, top of the line, but it didn't stop the creeping dread. Another incident came 2 days later. A delivery driver tried to force his way into my loft, claiming he had a package. My doorman, bless him, turned the guy away, but the security footage showed a man in a black cap, his face obscured, lingering too long outside my building. Sarah's private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Mike, confirmed the man was a known fixer for corporate firms, likely Nexa Farms. "They're watching you, Claire," Mike said. "This is bigger than we thought." "Bigger how?" I pressed him, my voice sharp despite the pain meds dulling my edges. Mike hesitated, then dropped a bomb. "We've found a burner phone in your parents' luggage, left in your guest room. It's got texts to an untraceable number discussing your recovery fund and your settlement account. They weren't just stealing, they were feeding someone information." My stomach churned. Were my parents pawns in Nexa Farms' game, or willing players? The line was blurring, and the answer terrified me. I was drowning in threats, corporate, familial, physical. The next night, my phone lit up with another anonymous message. "Stop digging or your sister's next." A photo was attached, this time of Lauren leaving her Seattle hospital, her scrubs visible under her coat. I called her immediately, my voice shaking. "Get somewhere safe," I told her. "They're not just after me." Lauren, now fully aware of our parents' deception, packed a bag and checked into a hotel under a false name. "I'm so sorry, Claire," she said. "I should have listened to you years ago." Her guilt was palpable, but I didn't have time for family therapy. I needed to survive. Mia took charge, her journalist instincts making her a force of nature. She and Alex moved me back to my loft, now fortified like a bunker, and brought in a team of friends. Old college buddies, a few co-workers who'd stood by me after the whistleblower fallout. They took shifts, ensuring I was never alone, never helpless again. But the pressure was relentless. My physical therapist doubled my sessions, warning that the missed appointments had caused scar tissue buildup, risking chronic pain if I didn't push harder. Every stretch, every step was agony, but quitting wasn't an option, not when my mobility, my career, my life were on the line. Then, the final piece of the puzzle clicked. Mike, the PI, called with a breakthrough. Your parents' burner phone was linked to a shell company tied to Nexafarm's offshore accounts, he said. They were paid $10,000, 0 cents up front to monitor you, with promises of more if they got your settlement login. My parents weren't just greedy, they were hired. Nexafarm had used my own family to spy on me, to drain me, to break me before I could testify in the federal case. The realization was a sledgehammer, shattering the last illusion that their betrayal was purely personal. I was done being a victim. I called Sarah and we built a plan. We filed a police report for the theft, backed by bank records and social media evidence. We sent a cease and desist letter to my parents, demanding repayment of the $40,000, 0 cents, and cutting all contact. I reported the gas leak and break-in attempts to the FBI, tying them to Nexafarm's intimidation campaign, and I reached out to Lauren, who was ready to testify against our parents if it came to that. They took $2,000, 0 cents from me too, she said, her voice hard. I'm done protecting them. The day my parents returned, I was ready. They walked into my loft, tanned and smug, carrying gift shop bags and wearing resort-branded hats. They froze when they saw Mia, Alex, and 2 Chicago PD officers waiting in my living room. "Claire, what's this?" my dad demanded, his salesman charm faltering. I wheeled forward, my back screaming, but my resolve ironclad. "This is the end," I said, holding up my phone with their Instagram post glowing on the screen. "You stole $40,000, 0 cents. You left me to die, and you were working for Nexafarm." My mom's face crumpled, her usual tears on cue, but my dad's eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting," he said. "We were stressed, Claire. Caregiving's hard. We deserved a break." I laughed, the sound cold even to my ears. "A break? You planned this before my crash. You sold me out to the people who tried to kill me." I showed them the burner phone texts, the bank transfers, the shell company link. Their faces paled, my mom's sobs turning real, my dad's bluster fading to silence. "You're done here," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "Leave the keys, leave my life, and don't come back." The officers stepped forward, reading their rights as they were escorted out. No charges were filed. Yet, but the message was clear. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their reckoning. The fallout was swift. Sarah's team filed a lawsuit against my parents for financial exploitation, and the FBI opened an investigation into Nexafarm's role in the crash, the break-in, and the gas leak. My parents' smear campaign backfired. Lauren's testimony and the public evidence turned family opinion against them. My Aunt Linda called to apologize, her voice thick with shame. "We believed their lies," she said. "We should have trusted you." 2 years later, my spine is stronger than ever, my scars a badge of survival. I moved to a new condo, a ground-floor haven with wide doorways and a private patio, free of my parents' taint. My finances are secure, my settlement safe, and my nonprofit for victims of familial financial abuse is thriving, with 20 members sharing stories that echo mine. Lauren and I are closer than ever, rebuilding a bond our parents tried to break. And Nexafarm? Their executives are facing indictments thanks to the evidence Mike uncovered and my testimony in the federal case. But the real victory is this: I'm free. Free from lies, from fear, from a family that saw me as a resource instead of a daughter. I've built a new family, Mia, Alex, Lauren, and friends who showed up when it mattered most. As I sit on my patio, the Chicago skyline glittering in the distance, I know I'm not just a survivor, I'm a fighter, and this fight is far from over. Want to know what happens when Nexa Farms CEOs face the courtroom, or how my parents' next move unravels? Keep following, because the truth always finds a way.